Chapter 4. Summoned. Alone in her rooms in the women's apartments, Moiraine adjusted the shawl embroidered with curling ivy and grapevines on her shoulders and studied the effect in the tall frame mirror standing in a corner. Her large, dark eyes could appear as sharp as a hawk's when she was angry. They seemed to pierce the silvered glass now. It was only happenstance that she had had the shawl in her saddlebags when she came to Faldara. With the blazing white flame of Tar Valon centered on the wearer's back and long fringe colored to show her Adja, Moiraine's was as blue as a morning sky. The shawls were seldom worn outside Tar Valon, and even there usually only inside the White Tower. Little in Tar Valon besides a meeting of the hall of the tower called for the formality of the shawls, and beyond the shining walls, a sight of the flame would send too many people running, to hide, or perhaps to fetch the children of the light. A white cloak's arrow was as fatal to an Aes Sedai as to anyone else, and the children were too wily to let an Aes Sedai see the bowman before the arrow struck, while she still might do something about it. Moiraine had certainly never expected to wear the shawl in Faldara, but for an audience with the Amyrlin, there were proprieties to observe. She was slender and not at all tall, and smooth-cheeked Aes Sedai agelessness often made her appear younger than she was, but Moiraine had a commanding grace and calm presence that could dominate any gathering. A manner ingrained growing up in the royal palace of Caerhien had been heightened, not submerged, by still more years as an Aes Sedai. She knew she might need every bit of it today, yet much of the calm was on the surface today. There must be trouble, or she would not have come herself, she thought for at least the 10th time. But beyond that lay 1,000 questions more. What trouble, and who did she choose to accompany her? Why here? Why now? It cannot be allowed to go wrong now. The great serpent ring on her right hand caught the light dully as she touched the delicate golden chain fastened in her dark hair, which hung in waves to her shoulders. A small, clear blue stone dangled from the chain in the middle of her forehead. Many in the White Tower knew of the tricks she could do using that stone as a focus. It was only a polished bit of blue crystal, just something a young girl had used in her first learning, with no one to guide her. That girl had remembered tales of Angreal and even more powerful Sa'angreal, those fabled remnants of the Age of Legends that allowed Aes Sedai to channel more of the one power than any could safely handle unaided. Remembered and thought some such focus was required to channel it all. Her sisters in the White Tower knew a few of her tricks and suspected others, including some that did not exist, some that had shocked her when she learned of them. The things she did with the stone were simple and small, if occasionally useful, the kind a child would imagine. But if the wrong women had accompanied the Amyrlin, the crystal might put them off balance because of the tales. A rapid, insistent knocking came at the chamber door. No Shienaran would knock that way, not at anyone's door, but least of all hers. She remained looking into the mirror until her eyes stared back serenely, all thought hidden in their dark depths. She checked the soft leather pouch hanging at her belt. Whatever troubles brought her out of Tar Valon, she will forget them when I lay this trouble before her. A second thumping, even more vigorous than the first, sounded before she crossed the room and opened the door with a calm smile for the 2 women who had come for her. She recognized them both. Dark-haired Anaya in her blue-fringed shawl, and fair-haired Leandrin in her red. Leandrin, not only young-seeming, but young and pretty, with a doll's face and a small, petulant mouth, had her hand raised to pound again. Her dark brows and darker eyes were a sharp contrast to the multitude of pale honey braids brushing her shoulders, but the combination was not uncommon in Tarabon. Both women were taller than Moiraine, though Leandrin by less than a hand. Anaya's blunt face broke into a smile as soon as Moiraine opened the door. That smile gave her the only beauty she would ever have, but it was enough. Almost everyone felt comforted, safe, and special when Anaya smiled at them. "The light shine on you, Moiraine. It's good to see you again. Are you well? It has been so long." My heart is lighter for your presence, Anaya. That was certainly true. It was good to know she had at least one friend among the Aes Sedai who had come to Faldara. The light illumine you. Leandrin's mouth tightened, and she gave her shawl a twitch. The Amyrlin's seat. She requires your presence, sister. Her voice was petulant, too, and cold-edged. Not for Moiraine's sake, or not solely. Leandrin always sounded dissatisfied with something. Frowning, she tried to look over Moiraine's shoulder into the room. This chamber, it is warded. We cannot enter. Why do you ward against your sisters? Against all, Moiraine replied smoothly. Many of the serving women are curious about Aes Sedai, and I do not want them pawing through my rooms when I am not here. There was no need to make a distinction until now. She pulled the door shut behind her, leaving all three of them in the corridor. Shall we go? We must not keep the Amyrlin waiting. She started down the hallway with Anaya chatting at her side. Leandrin stood for a moment staring at the door as if wondering what Moiraine was hiding, then hurried to join the others. She bracketed Moiraine, walking as stiffly as a guard. Anaya merely walked, keeping company. Their slippered footsteps fell softly on thick-woven carpets with simple patterns. Liveried women curtsied deeply as they passed, many more deeply than they would have for the Lord of Faldara himself. Aes Sedai, 3 together, and the Amyrlin's seat herself in the keep. It was more honor than any woman of the keep had ever expected in her lifetime. A few women of noble houses were out in the halls, and they curtsied too, which they most certainly would not have done for Lord Agilmar. Moiraine and Anaya smiled and bowed their heads to acknowledge each reverence, from servant or noble equally. Leandrin ignored them all. There were only women here, of course, no men. No Shinaran male above the age of 10 would enter the women's rooms without permission or invitation, although a few small boys ran and played in the halls here. They knelt on one knee, awkwardly, when their sisters dropped deep curtsies. Now and then Anaya smiled and ruffled a small head as she passed. "This time, Moiraine," Anaya said, "you have been gone from Tar Valon too long, much too long. Tar Valon misses you, your sisters miss you, and you are needed in the White Tower." "Some of us must work in the world," Moiraine said gently. "I will leave the hall of the tower to you, Anaya. Yet in Tar Valon, you hear more of what occurs in the world than I. Too often I outrun what happens where I was yesterday. What news have you?" 3 more false dragons. Leandrin bit the words off. "In Saldeia, Morandi, and Tyr, false dragons ravage the land, the while you blues smile and talk of nothing, and try to hold on to the past." Anaya raised an eyebrow, and Leandrin snapped her mouth shut with a sharp sniff. 3, Moiraine mused softly. For an instant her eyes gleamed, but she masked it quickly. 3 in the last 2 years, and now 3 more at once. As the others were, these will be dealt with also. This male vermin and any ragtag rabble who follow their banners. Moiraine was almost amused by the certainty in Leandrin's voice. Almost. She was too aware of the realities, too aware of the possibilities. "Have a few months been enough for you to forget, sister? The last false dragon all but tore Gildan apart before his army, ragtag, rabble or not, was defeated. Yes, Loghain is in Tar Valon by now, gentled and safe, I suppose, but some of our sisters died to overpower him. Even one sister dead is more loss than we can bear, but Gildan's losses were much worse. The 2 before Loghain could not channel, yet even so the people of Kandor and Arad Doman remember them well. Villages burned, and men dead in battle. How easily can the world deal with 3 at one time? How many will flock to their banners? There has never been a shortage of followers for any man claiming to be the Dragon Reborn. How great will the wars be this time?" "It isn't so grim as that," Anaya said. "As far as we know, only the one in Saldeia can channel. He has not had time to attract many followers, and sisters should already be there to deal with him. The Tyrans are harrying their false dragon and his followers through Hadden Merk, while the fellow in Mirandi is already in chains." She gave a short, wondering laugh. "To think the Mirandians of all people would deal with theirs so quickly. Ask, and they do not even call themselves Mirandians, but Lugarders, or Inishlini, or this or that lord's or lady's man. Yet for fear one of their neighbors would take the excuse to invade, the Mirandians leaped on their false dragon almost as soon as he opened his mouth to proclaim himself." "Still," Moiraine said, "three at the same time cannot be ignored. Has any sister been able to do a foretelling?" It was a slight chance. Few Aes Sedai had manifested any part of that talent, even the smallest part, in centuries, so she was not surprised when Anaya shook her head. Not surprised, but a little relieved. They reached a juncture of hallways at the same time as the Lady Amalisa. She dropped a full curtsy, bowing deep and spreading her pale green skirts wide. "Honor to Tar Valon," she murmured. "Honor to Aes Sedai." The sister of the Lord of Faldara required more than a nod of the head. Moiraine took Amalisa's hands and drew her to her feet. "You honor us, Amalisa. Rise, sister." Amalisa straightened gracefully with a flush on her face. She had never as much as been to Tar Valon, and to be called sister by an Aes Sedai was heady even for someone of her rank. Short and of middle years, she had a dark, mature beauty, and the color in her cheeks set it off. "You honor me too greatly, Moiraine Sedai." Moiraine smiled. "How long have we known each other, Amalisa? Must I now call you my Lady Amalisa, as if we had never sat over tea together?" "Of course not." Amalisa smiled back. The strength evident in her brother's face was in hers too, and no less for the softer line of cheek and jaw. There were those who said that as hard and renowned a fighter as Agilmar was, he was no better than an even match for his sister. But with the Amyrlin seat here, when King Izar visits Faldara, in private I call him Magami, little uncle, as I did when I was a child and he gave me rides on his shoulder, but in public it must be different. Anaya tisked. "Sometimes formality is necessary, but men often make more of it than they must. Please, call me Anaya, and I will call you Amalisa if I may." From the corner of her eye, Moiraine saw Egwene, far down the side hall, disappearing hurriedly around the corner. A stooped shape in a leather jerkin, head down and arms loaded with bundles, shambled at her heels. Moiraine permitted herself a small smile, quickly masked. If the girl shows as much initiative in Tar Valon, she thought wryly, she will sit in the Amyrlin seat one day, if she can learn to control that initiative, if there is an Amyrlin seat left on which to sit. When she turned her attention back to the others, Leandrin was speaking. "And I would welcome the chance to learn more of your land." She wore a smile, open and almost girlish, and her voice was friendly. Moiraine schooled her face to stillness as Amalisa extended an invitation to join her and her ladies in her private garden, and Leandrin accepted warmly. Leandrin made few friends, and none outside the Red Aja. Certainly never outside the Aes Sedai. She would sooner make friends with a man or a Trolloc. Moiraine was not sure Leandrin saw much difference between men and Trollocs. She was not sure any of the Red Aja did. Anaya explained that just now they must attend the Amyrlin seat. "Of course," Amalisa said. "The light illumine her and the Creator shelter her. But later then." She stood straight and bowed her head as they left her. Moiraine studied Leandrin as they walked, never looking at her directly. The honey-haired Aes Sedai was staring straight ahead, rosebud lips pursed thoughtfully. She appeared to have forgotten Moiraine and Anaya both. What is she up to? Anaya seemed not to have noticed anything out of the ordinary, but then she always managed to accept people both as they were and as they wanted to be. It constantly amazed Moiraine that Anaya dealt as well as she did in the White Tower, but those who were devious always seemed to take her openness and honesty, her acceptance of everyone, as cunning devices. They were always caught completely off balance when she turned out to mean what she said and say what she meant. 2, she had a way of seeing to the heart of things, and of accepting what she saw. Now she blithely resumed speaking of the news. The word from Andor is both good and bad. The street riots in Caemlyn died down with the coming of spring, but there is still talk, too much talk, blaming the Queen, and Tar Valon as well, for the long winter. Morgase holds her throne less securely than she did last year, but she holds it still, and will so long as Gareth Bryn is Captain General of the Queen's Guards. And the Lady Elaine, the daughter heir, and her brother, the Lord Gawain, have come safely to Tar Valon for their training. There was some fear in the White Tower that the custom would be broken. Not while Morgase has breath in her body, Moiraine said. Leandrin gave a little start, as if she had just awakened. Pray that she continues to have breath. The daughter heir's party was followed to the river Erinnen by the Children of the Light, to the very bridges of Tar Valon. More still camp outside Caemlyn for the chance of mischief, and inside Caemlyn still are those who listen. Perhaps it is time Morgase learned a little caution, Anaya sighed. The world is becoming more dangerous every day, even for a queen, perhaps especially for a queen. She was ever headstrong. I remember when she came to Tar Valon as a girl. She did not have the ability to become a full sister, and it rankled in her. Sometimes I think she pushes her daughter because of that, whatever the girl chooses. Moiraine sniffed disdainfully. Elaine was born with the spark in her. It was not a matter of choosing. Morgase would not risk letting the girl die from lack of training if all the White Cloaks in Amalisa were camped outside Caemlyn. She would command Gareth Bryn and the Queen's Guards to cut a path through them to Tar Valon, and Gareth Bryn would do it if he had to do it alone. But she still must keep the full extent of the girl's potential secret. Would the people of Andor knowingly accept Elaine on the Lion Throne after Morgase if they knew? Not just a queen trained in Tar Valon according to custom, but a full Aes Sedai? In all of recorded history, there had been only a handful of queens with the right to be called Aes Sedai, and the few who let it be known had all lived to regret it. She felt a touch of sadness, but too much was afoot to spare aid or even worry for one land and one throne. What else, Anaya? You must know that the great hunt of the Horn has been called in Ilion the first time in 400 years. The Ilianers say the last battle is coming. Anaya gave a little shiver, as well she might, but went on without a pause. And the Horn of Valere must be found before the final battle against the Shadow. Men from every land are already gathering, all eager to be part of the legend, eager to find the Horn. Morandi and Altara are on their toes, of course, thinking it's all a mask for a move against one of them. That is probably why the Morandians caught their false dragon so quickly. In any case, there will be a new lot of stories for the bards and gleemen to add to the cycle. The lights send it as only new stories. Perhaps not the stories they expect, Moiraine said. Leandrin looked at her sharply, and she kept her face still. I suppose not, Anaya said placidly. The stories they least expect will be exactly the ones they will add to the cycle. Beyond that, I have only rumor to offer. The sea folk are agitated, their ships flying from port to port with barely a pause. Sisters from the islands say the Coromor, their chosen one, is coming, but they won't say more. You know how close-mouthed the Atha an Mier are with outsiders about the Coromor, and in this our sisters seem to think more as sea folk than Aes Sedai. The Aiel appear to be stirring too, but no one knows why. No one ever knows with the Aiel. At least there is no evidence they mean to cross the spine of the world again, thank the light. She sighed and shook her head. What would I not give for even one sister from among the Aiel? Just one. We know too little of them. Moiraine laughed. Sometimes I think you belong in the Brown Aja, Anaya. Almouth Plain, Leandrin said, and looked surprised that she had spoken. Now that truly is rumor, sister, Anaya said. A few whispers heard as we were leaving Tar Valon. There may be fighting on Almouth Plain and perhaps Tomon Head as well. I say maybe. The whispers were faint. Rumors of rumors. We left before we could hear more. It would have to be Tarabon and Arad Doman, Moiraine said, and shook her head. They have squabbled over Almouth Plain for nearly 300 years, but it has never come to open blows. She looked at Leandrin. Aes Sedai were supposed to throw off all their old loyalties to lands and rulers, but few did so completely. It was hard not to care for the land of your birth. Why would they now— Enough of idle talk, the honey-haired woman broke in angrily. For you, Moiraine, the Amyrlin waits. She took 3 quick strides ahead of the others and threw open one of a pair of tall doors. For you, the Amyrlin will have no idle talk. Unconsciously touching the pouch at her waist, Moiraine went past Leandrin through the doorway, with a nod, as if the other woman were holding the door for her. She did not even smile at the white flash of anger on Leandrin's face. What is the wretched girl up to? Brightly colored carpets covered the anteroom floor in layers, and the room was pleasantly furnished with chairs and cushioned benches and small tables, the wood simply worked or just polished. Brocaded curtains sided the tall arrow slits to make them seem more like windows. No fires burned in the fireplaces. The day was warm, and the Shienaran chill would not come until nightfall. Fewer than half a dozen of the Aes Sedai who had accompanied the Amyrlin were there. Varen Mathwin and Seraphel of the Brown Aja did not look up at Moiraine's entrance. Seraphel was intently reading an old book with a worn, faded leather cover, handling its tattered pages carefully, while plump Varen, sitting cross-legged beneath an arrow slit, held a small blossom up to the light and made notes and sketches in a precise hand in a book balanced on her knee. She had an open ink pot on the floor beside her and a small pile of flowers on her lap. The Brown sisters concerned themselves with little besides seeking knowledge. Moiraine sometimes wondered if they were really aware of what was going on in the world, or even immediately around them. The 3 other women already in the room turned, but they made no effort to approach Moiraine, only looked at her. One, a slender woman of the Yellow Aja, she did not know. She spent too little time in Tar Valon to know all the Aes Sedai, although their numbers were no longer very great. She was acquainted with the 2 remaining, however. Carlinia was as pale of skin and cold of manner as the white fringe on her shawl, the exact opposite in every way of dark, fiery Alana Mosvani of the Green. But they both stood and stared at her without speaking, without expression. Alana sharply snugged her shawl around her, but Carlinia made no move at all. The slender yellow sister turned away with an air of regret. "The light illumine you all, sisters," Moiraine said. No one answered. She was not sure Seraphel or Varen had even heard. Where are the others? There was no need for them all to be there. Most would be resting in their rooms, freshing from the journey, but she was on edge now, all the questions she could not ask running through her head. None of it showed on her face. The inner door opened and Lyanna appeared without her gilt-flamed staff. The Keeper of the Chronicles was as tall as most men, willowy and graceful, still beautiful, with coppery skin and short dark hair. She wore a blue stole a hand wide instead of a shawl, for she sat in the hall of the tower, though as keeper, not to represent her Aja. "There you are," she said briskly to Moiraine and gestured to the door behind her. "Come, sister, the Amyrlin seat is waiting." She spoke naturally in a clipped, quick way that never changed, whether she was angry or joyful or excited. As Moiraine followed Lyanna in, she wondered what emotion the keeper was feeling now. Lyanna pulled the door to behind them. It banged shut with something of the sound of a cell door closing. The Amyrlin seat herself sat behind a broad table in the middle of the carpet, and on the table rested a flattened cube of gold, the size of a travel chest, and ornately worked with silver. The table was heavily built, its legs stout, but it seemed to squat under a weight 2 strong men would have had trouble lifting. At the sight of the golden cube, Moiraine had difficulty keeping her face unruffled. The last she had seen of it, it had been safely locked in Agelmar's strong room. On learning of the Amyrlin seat's arrival, she had meant to tell her of it herself. That it was already in the Amyrlin's possession was a trifle, but a worrisome trifle. Events could be outpacing her. She swept a deep curtsy and said formally, "As you called me, Mother, so have I come." The Amyrlin extended her hand, and Moiraine kissed her great serpent ring, no different from that of any other Aes Sedai. Rising, she made her tone more conversational, but not too much so. She was aware of the keeper standing behind her, beside the door. "I hope you had a pleasant journey, Mother." The Amyrlin had been born in Tyr of a simple fisherman's family, not a noble house, and her name was Siuan Sanche, though very few had used that name or even thought of it in the 10 years since she had been raised from the hall of the tower. She was the Amyrlin's seat, that was the whole of it. The broad stole on her shoulders was striped in the colors of the 7 Ajahs. The Amyrlin was of all Ajahs and of none. She was only of medium height, and handsome rather than beautiful, but her face held a strength that had been there before her elevation, the strength of the girl who had survived the streets of the Mall, Tyr's port district, and her clear blue gaze had made kings and queens, and even the captain-commander of the Children of the Light, drop their eyes. Her own eyes were strained now, and there was a new tightness to her mouth. "We called the winds to speed our vessels up the Erenin, daughter, and even turned the currents to our aid." The Amyrlin's voice was deep and sad. "I have seen the flooding we caused in villages along the river, and the light only knows what we have done to the weather. We will not have endeared ourselves by the damage we've done and the crops we may have ruined. All to reach here as quickly as possible." Her eyes strayed to the ornate golden cube, and she half lifted a hand as if to touch it, but when she spoke it was to say, "Elaida is in Tar Valon, daughter. She came with Elaine and Gawain." Moiraine was conscious of Lyanna standing to one side, quiet as always in the presence of the Amyrlin, but watching and listening. "I am surprised, Mother," she said carefully. "This is no time for Morghese to be without Aes Sedai counsel." Morghese was one of the few rulers to openly admit to an Aes Sedai counselor. Almost all had one, but few admitted it. "Elaida insisted, daughter, and queen or not, I doubt Morghese is a match for Elaida in a contest of wills. In any case, perhaps this time she did not wish to be. Elaine has potential, more than I've ever seen before. Already she shows progress. The Red Sisters are swollen up like puff-fish with it. I don't think the girl leans to their way of thinking, but she is young and there is no telling. Even if they don't manage to bend her, it will make little difference. Elaine could well be the most powerful Aes Sedai in 1,000 years, and it is the Red Ajah who found her. They have gained much status in the hall from the girl." "I have 2 young women with me in Faldara, Mother," Moiraine said. "Both from the 2 rivers, where the blood of Manetheren still runs strong, though they do not even remember there was once a land called Manetheren. The old blood sings, Mother, and it sings loudly in the 2 rivers. Egwene, a village girl, is at least as strong as Elaine. I have seen the daughter heir, and I know. As for the other, Nynaeve was the wisdom in their village, yet she is little more than a girl herself. It says something of her that the women of her village chose her wisdom at her age. Once she gains conscious control of what she now does without knowing, she will be as strong as any in Tar Valon. With training she will shine like a bonfire beside the candles of Elaine and Egwene. And there is no chance these 2 will choose the Red. They are amused by men, exasperated by them, but they do like them. They will easily counter whatever influence the Red Ajah gains in the White Tower from finding Elaine." The Amyrlin nodded as if it were all of no consequence. Moiraine's eyebrows lifted in surprise before she caught herself and smoothed her features. Those were the 2 main concerns in the hall of the tower, that fewer girls who could be trained to channel the one power were found every year, or so it seemed, and that fewer of real power were found. Worse than the fear in those who blamed Aes Sedai for the breaking of the world, worse than the hatred from the Children of the Light, worse even than the workings of dark friends, were the sheer dwindling of numbers and the lessening of abilities. The corridors of the White Tower were sparsely populated, where once they had been crowded, and what could once be done easily with the one power could now be done only with difficulty or not at all. Elida had another reason for coming to Tar Valon, daughter. She sent the same message by 6 different pigeons to make sure I received it, and to whom else in Tar Valon she sent pigeons I can only guess. Then came herself. She told the Hall of the Tower that you are meddling with a young man who is Tarviran and dangerous. He was in Caemlyn, she said, but when she found the inn where he had been staying, she discovered you had spirited him away. The people at that inn served us well and faithfully, Mother. If she harmed any of them—" Moiraine could not keep the sharpness out of her voice, and she heard Leanne shift. One did not speak to the Amyrlin seat in that tone. Not even a king on his throne did. "You should know, daughter," the Amyrlin said dryly, "that Elida harms no one except those she considers dangerous, dark friends, or those poor fool men who try to channel the One power, or one who threatens Tar Valon. Everyone else who isn't Aes Sedai might as well be pieces on a stone's board as far as she is concerned. Luckily for him, the innkeeper, one Master Gill as I remember, apparently thinks much of Aes Sedai, and so answered her questions to her satisfaction. Elida actually spoke well of him, but she spoke more of the young man you took away with you. More dangerous than any man since Arthur Hawkwing, she said. She has the foretelling sometimes, you know, and her words carried weight with the Hall." For Lyanna's sake, Moiraine made her voice as meek as she could. That was not very meek, but it was the best she could do. "I have 3 young men with me, Mother, but none of them is a king, and I doubt very much if any of them even dreams of uniting the world under one ruler. No one has dreamed Arthur Hawkwing's dream since the War of the 100 Years. "Yes, daughter. Village youths, so Lord Agelmar tells me. But one of them is Ta'Viran." The Amyrlin's eyes strayed to the flattened cube again. "It was put forward in the hall that you should be sent into retreat for contemplation. This was proposed by one of the sitters for the Green Ajah, with the other 2 nodding approval as she spoke." Lyanna made a sound of disgust, or perhaps frustration. She always kept in the background when the Amyrlin seat spoke, but Moiraine could understand the small interruption this time. The Green Ajah had been allied with the Blue for 1,000 years. Since Arthur Hawkwing's time they had all but spoken with one voice. "I have no desire to hoe vegetables in some remote village, Mother. Nor will I, whatever the Hall of the Tower says." It was further proposed also by the Greens that your care during your retreat should be given to the Red Ajah. The Red sitters tried to appear surprised, but they looked like fisher birds who knew the catch was unguarded. The Amyrlin sniffed. The Reds professed reluctance to take custody of one not of their Ajah, but said they would accede to the wishes of the Hall. Despite herself, Moiraine shivered. "That would be most unpleasant, Mother." "It would be worse than unpleasant, much worse. The Reds were never gentle." She put the thought of it firmly to one side to deal with later. "Mother, I cannot understand this apparent alliance between the Greens and the Reds. Their beliefs, their attitudes toward men, their views of our very purposes as Aes Sedai are completely opposite. A Red and a Green cannot even talk to each other without coming to shouts." "Things change, daughter. 4 of the last 5 women raised Amyrlin have come from the Blue. Perhaps they feel that is too many, or that the Blue way of thinking no longer suffices in a world full of false dragons. After 1,000 years, many things change." The Amyrlin grimaced and spoke as if to herself. "Old walls weaken, and old barriers fall." She shook herself and her voice firmed. "There was yet another proposal, one that still smells like weak old fish on the jetty. Since Lyanna is of the Blue Ajah and I came from the Blue, it was put forward that sending 2 Sisters of the Blue with me on this journey would give the Blue 4 representatives. Proposed in the hall, to my face, as if they were discussing repairing the drains. 2 of the White Sisters stood against me and 2 Green. The Yellow muttered among themselves, then would not speak for or against. One more saying nay, and your sisters Anaya and Maigan would not be here. There was even some talk, open talk, that I should not leave the White Tower at all." Moiraine felt a greater shock than on hearing that the Red Ajah wanted her in their hands. Whatever Ajah she came from, the Keeper of the Chronicles spoke only for the Amyrlin, and the Amyrlin spoke for all Aes Sedai and all Ajahs. That was the way it had always been, and no one had ever suggested otherwise, not in the darkest days of the Trolloc Wars, not when Arthur Hawkwing's armies had penned every surviving Aes Sedai inside Tar Valon. Above all, the Amyrlin seat was the Amyrlin seat. Every Aes Sedai was pledged to obey her. No one could question what she did or where she chose to go. This proposal went against 3,000 years of custom and law. "Who would dare, Mother?" The Amyrlin seat's laugh was bitter. "Almost anyone, daughter. Riots in Caemlyn, the great hunt called without any of us having a hint of it until the proclamation, false dragons popping up like red bells after a rain, nations fading, and more nobles playing at the game of houses than at any time since Arthur Hawkwing cut all their plottings short. And worst of all, every one of us knows the Dark One is stirring again. Show me a sister who does not think the White Tower is losing its grip on events, and if she is not Brown Ajah, she is dead. Time may be growing short for all of us, daughter. Sometimes I think I can almost feel it growing shorter." "As you say, Mother, things change, but there are still worse perils outside the shining walls than within." For a long moment the Amyrlin met Moiraine's gaze, then nodded slowly. "Leave us, Lyanna. I would talk to my daughter Moiraine alone." There was only a moment's hesitation before Lyanna said, "As you wish, Mother." Moiraine could feel her surprise. The Amyrlin gave few audiences without the Keeper present, especially not to a sister she had reason to chastise. The door opened and closed behind Lyanna. She would not say a word in the anteroom of what had occurred inside, but the news that Moiraine was alone with the Amyrlin would spread through the Aes Sedai and Fal Dara like wildfire through a dry forest, and the speculation would begin. As soon as the door closed, the Amyrlin stood, and Moiraine felt a momentary tingle in her skin as the other woman channeled the one power. For an instant, the Amyrlin seat seemed to her to be surrounded by a nimbus of bright light. "I don't know that any of the others have your old trick," the Amyrlin seat said, lightly touching the blue stone on Moiraine's forehead with one finger. "But most of us have some small tricks remembered from childhood. In any event, no one can hear what we say now." Suddenly she threw her arms around Moiraine, a warm hug between old friends. Moiraine hugged back as warmly. "You are the only one, Moiraine, with whom I can remember who I was. Even Lyanna always acts as if I had become the stole and the staff, even when we are alone, as if we'd never giggled together as novices. Sometimes I wish we still were novices, you and I, still innocent enough to see it all as a gleeman's tale come true, still innocent enough to think we would find men. They would be princes, remember, handsome and strong and gentle, who could bear to live with women of an Aes Sedai's power. Still innocent enough to dream of the happy ending to the gleeman's tale, of living our lives as other women do, just with more than they. We are Aes Sedai, Siouan. We have our duty. Even if you and I had not been born to channel, would you give it up for a home and a husband, even a prince? I do not believe it. That is a village goodwife's dream. Not even the Greens go so far." The Amyrlin stepped back. "No, I would not give it up. Most of the time, no. But there have been times I envied that village goodwife. At this moment, I almost do. Moiraine, if anyone, even Lyanna, discovers what we plan, we will both be stilled. And I can't say they would be wrong to do it." Chapter 5. The Shadow in Shinar. Stilled. The word seemed to quiver in the air, almost visible. When it was done to a man who could channel the power, who must be stopped before madness drove him to the destruction of all around him, it was called gentling, but for Aes Sedai it was stilling. Stilled, no longer able to channel the flow of the one power, able to sense Saidar, the female half of the true source, but no longer having the ability to touch it, remembering what was gone forever. So seldom had it been done that every novice was required to learn the name of each Aes Sedai since the breaking of the world who had been stilled, and her crime, but none could think of it without a shudder. Women bore being stilled no better than men did being gentled. Moiraine had known the risk from the first, and she knew it was necessary. That did not mean it was pleasant to dwell on. Her eyes narrowed, and only the gleam in them showed her anger and her worry. Lyanna would follow you to the slopes of Sheol Ghul, Siuan, and into the pit of doom. You cannot think she would betray you. No. But then would she think it betrayal? Is it betrayal to betray a traitor? Do you never think of that? Never. What we do, Siuan, is what must be done. We have both known it for nearly 20 years. The wheel weaves as the wheel wills, and you and I were chosen for this by the pattern. We are a part of the prophecies, and the prophecies must be fulfilled. Must. The prophecies must be fulfilled. We were taught that they will be and must be, and yet that fulfillment is treason to everything else we were taught. Some would say to everything we stand for. Rubbing her arms, the Amyrlin seat walked over to peer through the narrow arrow slit at the garden below. She touched the curtains. Here in the women's apartments they hang draperies to soften the rooms, and they plant beautiful gardens, but there is no part of this place not purpose-made for battle, death, and killing. She continued in the same pensive tone. Only twice since the breaking of the world has the Amyrlin seat been stripped of stole and staff. Tetsuan, who betrayed Manetheren for jealousy of Elisanne's powers, and Bonwyn, who tried to use Arthur Hawkwing for a puppet to control the world, and so nearly destroyed Tar Valon. The Amyrlin continued her study of the garden. Both of the red, and both replaced by Amyrlin from the blue. The reason there has not been an Amyrlin chosen from the red since Bonwyn, and the reason the red Aja will take any pretext to pull down an Amyrlin from the blue, all wrapped neatly together. I have no wish to be the third to lose the stole and the staff, Moiraine. For you, of course, it would mean being stilled and put outside the shining walls. Elida, for one, would never let me off so easily. Moiraine watched her friend's back intently. Light, what has come over her? She has never been like this before. Where is her strength, her fire? But it will not come to that, Siuan. The other woman went on as if she had not spoken. For me, it would be different. Even stilled, an Amyrlin who has been pulled down cannot be allowed to wander about loose. She might be seen as a martyr, become a rallying point for opposition. Tetsuan and Bonwyn were kept in the White Tower as servants, scullery maids, who could be pointed to as cautions as to what can happen to the mightiest. No one can rally around a woman who must scrub floors and pots all day. Pity her, yes, but not rally to her. Eyes blazing, Moiraine leaned her fists on the table. Look at me, Siuan, look at me. Are you saying that you want to give up after all these years, after all we have done? Give up and let the world go? And all for fear of us switching for not getting the pots clean enough. She put into it all the scorn she could summon, and was relieved when her friend spun to face her. The strength was still there, strained, but still there. Those clear blue eyes were as hot with anger as her own. I remember which of the two of us squealed the loudest when we were switched as novices. You had lived a soft life in Cairhien, Moiraine, not like working a fishing boat. Abruptly, Siuan slapped the table with a loud crack. No, I am not suggesting giving up, but neither do I propose to watch everything slide out of our hands while I can do nothing. Most of my troubles with the Hall stem from you. Even the Greens wonder why I haven't called you to the tower and taught you a little discipline. Half the sisters with me think you should be handed over to the Reds, And if that happens, you will wish you were a novice again, with nothing worse to look forward to than a switching. Light! If any of them remember we were friends as novices, I'd be there beside you. We had a plan. A plan, Moiraine. Locate the boy and bring him to Tar Valon, where we could hide him, keep him safe and guide him. Since you left the tower, I have had only 2 messages from you. 2! I feel as if I'm trying to sail the fingers of the dragon in the dark. 1 message to say you were entering the 2 rivers, going to this village, this Emond's Field. Soon, I thought. He's found, and she'll have him in hand soon. Then word from Cainlan to say you were coming to Shinar, to Faldara, not Tar Valon. Faldara, with the blight almost close enough to touch. Faldara, where Trollocs raid and Myrddraal ride as near every day as makes no difference. Nearly 20 years of planning and searching, and you toss all our plans practically in the Dark One's face. Are you mad? Now that she had stirred life in the other woman, Moiraine returned to outward calm herself. Calm, but firm insistence, too. The pattern pays no heed to human plans, Siuan. With all our scheming, we forgot what we were dealing with. ta'Veren. Elida is wrong. Artur Pendrag Tonreal was never this strongly ta'Veren. The wheel will weave the pattern around this young man as it wills, whatever our plans. The anger left Amyrlin's face, replaced by white-faced shock. It sounds as if you are saying we might as well give up. Do you now suggest standing aside and watching the world burn? No, Siuan, never standing aside. Yet the world will burn, Siuan, one way or another, whatever we do. You could never see that. But we must now realize that our plans are precarious things. We have even less control than we thought, perhaps only a fingernail's grip. The winds of destiny are blowing, Siuan, and we must ride them where they take us. The Amyrlin shivered as if she felt those winds icy on the back of her neck. Her hands went to the flattened cube of gold, blunt, capable fingers finding precise points in the complex designs. Cunningly balanced, the top lifted back to reveal a curled, golden horn nestled within a space designed to hold it. She lifted the instrument and traced the flowing silver script in the old tongue inlaid around the flaring mouth. "The grave is no bar to my call," she translated, so softly she seemed to be speaking to herself. "The Horn of Valere, made to call dead heroes back from the grave, and prophecy said it would only be found just in time for the last battle." Abruptly she thrust the horn back into its niche and closed the lid as if she could no longer bear the sight of it. Agilmar pushed it into my hands as soon as the welcome was done. He said he was afraid to go into his own strong room any longer with it there. The temptation was too great, he said, to sound the horn himself and lead the host that answered its call north through the blight, to level Shaol Ghul itself and put an end to the Dark One. He burned with the ecstasy of glory, and it was that, he said, that told him it was not to be him, must not be him. He could not wait to be rid of it, yet he wanted it still. Moiraine nodded. Agilmar was familiar with the prophecy of the horn. Most who fought the Dark One were. "Let whosoever sounds me think not of glory, but only of salvation." Salvation? The Amyrlin laughed bitterly. From the look in Agilmar's eyes, he didn't know whether he was giving away salvation or rejecting the condemnation of his own soul. He only knew he had to be rid of it before it burned him up. He has tried to keep it secret, but he says there are rumors in the keep already. I do not feel his temptation, yet the horn still makes my skin crawl. He will have to take it back into his strong room until I leave. I could not sleep with it even in the next room. She rubbed frown lines from her forehead and sighed. And it was not to be found until just before the last battle. Can it be that close? I hoped we would have more time. The Careathon cycle. Yes, Moiraine, you do not have to remind me. I've lived with the prophecies of the dragon as long as you. The Amyrlin shook her head. Never more than 1 false dragon in a generation since the breaking, and now 3 loose in the world at one time, and 3 more in the past 2 years. The pattern demands a dragon because the pattern weaves toward Tarman Gaden. Sometimes doubt fills me, Moiraine." She said it musingly, as if wondering at it, and went on in the same tone. "What if Loghain was the one? He could channel before the Reds brought him to the White Tower and we gentled him. So can Masrim Time, the man in Saldaea. What if it is him? There are sisters in Saldaea already. He may be taken by now. What if we have been wrong since the start? What happens if the dragon reborn is gentled before the last battle even begins? Even prophecy can fail if the one prophesied is slain or gentled, and then we face the Dark One naked to the storm. Neither of them is the one, Siwan. The pattern does not demand a dragon, but the one true dragon. Until he proclaims himself, the pattern will continue to throw up false dragons, but after that there will be no others. If Loghain or the other were the one, there would be no others. For he shall come like the breaking dawn, and shatter the world again with his coming and make it anew. Either we go naked in the storm or cling to a protection that will scourge us. The light help us all." The Amyrlin shook herself as if to throw off her own words. Her face was set, as though bracing for a blow. "You could never hide what you were thinking from me as you do from everyone else, Moiraine. You have more to tell me, and nothing good." For answer, Moiraine took the leather pouch from her belt and upended it, spilling the contents on the table. It appeared to be only a heap of fragmented pottery, shiny black and white. The Amyrlin's seat touched one bit curiously, and her breath caught. "Quaindiar." "Heartstone," Moiraine agreed. The making of Quaindiar had been lost at the breaking of the world, but what had been made of Heartstone had survived the cataclysm. Even those objects swallowed by the earth or sunk in the sea had survived. They must have. No known force could break Quaindiar once it was complete. Even the one power directed against Heartstone only made it stronger, except that some power had broken this. The Amyrlin hastily assembled the pieces. What they formed was a disk the size of a man's hand, half blacker than pitch and half whiter than snow, the colors meeting along a sinuous line, unfaded by age. The ancient symbol of Aes Sedai, before the world was broken, when men and women wielded the power together. Half of it was now called the Flame of Tar Valon. The other half was scrawled on doors, the Dragon's Fang, to accuse those within of evil. Only 7 like it had been made. Everything ever made of Heartstone was recorded in the White Tower, and those 7 were remembered above all. Siwan Sanche stared at it as she would have at a viper on her pillow. "One of the seals on the Dark One's prison," she said finally, reluctantly. It was those 7 seals over which the Amyrlin seat was supposed to be watcher. The secret hidden from the world, if the world ever thought of it, was that no Amyrlin seat had known where any of the seals were since the Trolloc Wars. "We know the Dark One is stirring, Siwan. We know his prison cannot stay sealed forever. Human work can never match the Creator's. We knew he has touched the world again, even if thank the light only indirectly. Dark friends multiply, and what we called evil but 10 years ago seems almost caprice compared with what now is done every day. If the seals are already breaking, we may have no time at all. Little enough. But that little may be enough. It will have to be." The Amyrlin touched the fractured seal, and her voice grew tight, as if she were forcing herself to speak. "I saw the boy, you know, in the courtyard during the welcome. It is one of my talents, seeing ta'veren. A rare talent these days, even more rare than ta'veren, and certainly not of much use. A tall boy, a fairly handsome young man, not much different from any young man you might see in any town." She paused to draw breath. "Moiraine, he blazed like the sun. I've seldom been afraid in my life, but the sight of him made me afraid right down to my toes. I wanted to cower, to howl. I could barely speak. Agilmar thought I was angry with him, I said so little. That young man, he's the one we have sought these 20 years? There was a hint of question in her voice. Moiraine answered it. "He is." "Are you certain? Can he channel the One Power?" Her mouth strained around the words, and Moiraine felt the tension too, a twisting inside, a cold clutching at her heart. She kept her face smooth, though. "He can." A man wielding the One Power. That was a thing no Aes Sedai could contemplate without fear. It was a thing the whole world feared, and I will loose it on the world. Rand al'Thor will stand before the world as the dragon reborn. The Amyrlin shuddered. Rand al'Thor. It does not sound like a name to inspire fear and set the world on fire. She gave another shiver and rubbed her arms briskly, but her eyes suddenly shone with a purposeful light. "If he is the one, then we truly may have time enough. But is he safe here? I have 2 red sisters with me, and I can no longer answer for green or yellow either. The light consume me, I can't answer for any of them, not with this. Even Varen and Seraphel would leap on him the way they would a scarlet adder in a nursery." "He is safe, for the moment." The Amyrlin waited for her to say more. The silence stretched until it was plain she would not. Finally, the Amyrlin said, "You say our old plan is useless. What do you suggest now?" "I have purposely let him think I no longer have any interest in him, that he may go where he pleases for all of me." She raised her hands as the Amyrlin opened her mouth. "It was necessary, Siwan. Rand al'Thor was raised in the 2 rivers, where Manetherin's stubborn blood flows in every vein, and his own blood is like rock beside clay compared to Manetherin's. He must be handled gently, or he will bolt in any direction but the one we want." "Then we'll handle him like a newborn babe. We'll wrap him in swaddling clothes and play with his toes if that's what you think we need. But to what immediate purpose? His 2 friends, Matrim Cawthon and Perine Bara, are ripe to see the world before they sink back into the obscurity of the 2 rivers. If they can sink back, they are ta'veren too, if lesser than he. I will induce them to carry the Horn of Valere to Ilion." She hesitated, frowning. "There is a problem with Mat. He carries a dagger from Shadar Logoth." "Shadar Logoth? Light! Why did you ever let them get near that place? Every stone of it is tainted. There isn't a pebble safe to carry away. Light, help us. If Mordeth touched the boy—" The Amyrlin sounded as though she were strangling. "If that happened, the world would be doomed." "But it did not, Siwan. We do what we must from necessity, and it was necessary. I have done enough so that Mat will not infect others, but he had the dagger too long before I knew. The link is still there. I had thought I must take him to Tar Valon to cure it, but with so many sisters present, it might be done here. So long as there are a few you can trust not to see dark friends, where there are none. You and I and 2 others will suffice, using my Angreal. Lyanna will do for one, and I can find another." Suddenly the Amyrlin's seat gave a wry grin. "The Hall wants that Angreal back, Moiraine. There are not very many of them left, and you are now considered unreliable." Moiraine smiled, but it did not touch her eyes. "They will think worse of me before I am done. Mat will leap at the chance to be so big a part of the legend of the Horn, and Perrin should not be hard to convince. He needs something to take his mind off his own troubles. Rand knows what he is, some of it at least, a little, and he is afraid of it naturally. He wants to go off somewhere alone, where he cannot hurt anyone. He says he will never wield the power again, but he fears not being able to stop it. As well he might. Easier to give up drinking water." "Exactly. And he wants to be free from Aes Sedai." Moiraine gave a small, mirthless smile. Offered the chance to leave Aes Sedai behind and still stay with his friends a while longer, he should be as eager as Mat. "But how is he leaving Aes Sedai behind? Surely you must travel with him. We can't lose him now, Moiraine." "I cannot travel with him. It is a long way from Faldara to Ilion, but he has traveled almost as far already. He must be let off the leash for a time. There is no help for it. I have had all of their old clothes burned. There's been too much opportunity for some shred of what they were wearing to have fallen into the wrong hands. I will cleanse them before they leave. They will not even realize it has been done. There will be no chance they can be tracked that way, and the only other threat of that kind is locked away here in the dungeon." The Amyrlin, midway in nodding approval, gave her a questioning look, but she did not pause. "They will travel as safely as I can manage, Siwan, and when Rand needs me in Ilion, I will be there, and I will see that it is he who presents the horn to the Council of Nine and the assemblage. I will see to everything in Ilion. Siwan, the Ilianers would follow the dragon or Baal Zaman himself if he came bearing the Horn of Valere, and so will the greater part of those gathered for the hunt. The true dragon reborn will not need to gather a following before nations move against him. He will begin with a nation around him and an army at his back." The Amyrlin dropped back into her chair, but immediately leaned forward. She seemed caught between weariness and hope. "But will he proclaim himself? If he's afraid, the Light knows he should be Moiraine, but men who name themselves as the dragon want the power. If he does not, I have the means to see him named dragon whether he wills it or not, and even if I somehow fail, the pattern itself will see him named dragon whether he wills it or not. Remember, he is ta'veren, Siwan. He has no more control over his fate than a candlewick has over the flame." The Amyrlin sighed. "It's risky, Moiraine. Risky. But my father used to say, 'Girl, if you won't take a chance, you'll never win a copper.' We have plans to make. Sit down. This won't be done quickly. I will send for wine and cheese." Moiraine shook her head. "We have been closeted alone too long already. If any did try listening and found your warding, they will be wondering already. It is not worth the risk. We can contrive another meeting tomorrow. Besides, my dearest friend, I cannot tell you everything, and I cannot risk letting you know I am holding anything back." "I suppose you are right. But first thing in the morning. There's so much I have to know." "The morning," Moiraine agreed. The Amyrlin rose, and they hugged again. "In the morning I will tell you everything you need to know." Lyanna gave Moiraine a sharp look when she came out into the anteroom, then darted into the Amyrlin's chamber. Moiraine tried to put on a chastened face, as if she had endured one of the Amyrlin's infamous upbraidings. Most women, however strong-willed, returned from those big-eyed and weak-kneed, but the expression was foreign to her. She looked more angry than anything else, which served much the same purpose. She was only vaguely aware of the other women in the outer room. She thought some had gone and others come since she went in, but she barely looked at them. The hour was growing late, and there was much to be done before the morning came. Much before she spoke to the Amyrlin's seat again. Quickening her step, she moved deeper into the keep.
The column would have made an impressive sight under the waxing moon, moving through the Taraban night to the jangle of harness, had there been anyone to see it. A full 2,000 children of the light, well-mounted, in white tabards and cloaks, armor burnished, with their train of supply wagons and farriers and grooms with the strings of remounts. There were villages in this sparsely forested country, but they had left roads behind, and stayed clear of even farmers' crofts. They were to meet someone at a fly-speck village near the northern border of Taraban, at the edge of Almuth Plain. Jeffron Bornhold, riding at the head of his men, wondered what it was all about. He remembered too well his interview with Pedron Niall, Lord Captain Commander of the Children of the Light, in Amador. But he had learned little there. "We are alone, Jeffron," the white-haired man had said. His voice was thin and reedy with age. "I remember giving you the oath. 36 years ago it must be now?" Bornhold straightened. "My Lord Captain Commander, may I ask why I was called back from Camelin, and with such urgency? A push and Morghese could be toppled. There are houses in Andor that see dealing with Tar Valon as we do, and they were ready to lay claim to the throne. I left Eamon Valda in charge, but he seemed intent on following the daughter heir to Tar Valon. I would not be surprised to learn the man has kidnapped the girl or even attacked Tarvalin. And Dane, Bornhold's son, had arrived just before Bornhold was recalled. Dane was full of zeal. Too much zeal sometimes. Enough to fall in blindly with whatever Valder proposed. Valder walks in the light, Jephram. But you are the best battle commander among the children. You will assemble a full legion, the best men you can find, and take them into Taraban, avoiding any eyes attached to a tongue that may speak. Any such tongue must be silenced if the eyes see. Bornhold hesitated. 50 children together, or even 100, could enter any land without question, at least without open question. But an entire legion? Is it war, my Lord Captain Commander? There is talk in the streets. Wild rumors, mainly, about Arthur Hawkwing's armies come back. The old man did not speak. The king does not command the children, Lord Captain Bornhold. For the first time, there was a sharp snap in the Lord Commander's voice. I do. Let the king sit in his palace and do what he does best. Nothing. You will be met at a village called Alcruna, and there you will receive your final orders. I expect your legion to ride in 3 days. Now go, Jephram. You have work to do. Bornhold frowned. Pardon, my Lord Captain Commander, but who will meet me? Why am I risking war with Taraban? You will be told what you must know when you reach Alcruna. The Lord Captain Commander suddenly looked more than his age. Absently he plucked at his white tunic, with the golden sunburst of the children large on the chest. There are forces at work beyond what you know, Jephram. Beyond what even you can know. Choose your men quickly. Now go. Ask me no more. And the light ride with you. Now Bornhold straightened in his saddle, working a knot out of his back. I am getting old, he thought. A day and a night in the saddle, with 2 pauses to water the horses, and he felt every gray hair on his head. He would not even have noticed a few years ago. At least I have not killed any innocents. He could be as hard on dark friends as any man sworn to the light. Dark friends must be destroyed before they pulled the whole world under the shadow. But he wanted to be sure they were dark friends first. It had been difficult avoiding Tarabaner eyes with so many men, even in the backcountry. But he had managed it. No tongues had needed to be silenced. The scouts he sent out came riding back, and behind them came more men in white cloaks, some carrying torches to ruin the night vision of everyone at the head of the column. With a muttered curse, Bornhold ordered a halt while he studied those who came to meet him. Their cloaks bore the same golden sunburst on the breast as his, the same as every child of the light, and their leader even had golden knots of rank below it, equivalent to Bornhold's. But behind their sunbursts were red shepherd's crooks, questioners. With hot irons and pincers and dripping water, the questioners pulled confession and repentance from dark friends, but there were those who said they decided guilt before they ever began. Jephram Bornhold was one who said it. I have been sent here to meet questioners? We have been waiting for you, Lord Captain Bornhold, the leader said in a harsh voice. He was a tall, hook-nosed man with the gleam of certainty in his eyes that every questioner had. You could have made better time. I am Einar Saren, second to Jakim Karadin, who commands the Hand of the Light in Taraban. The Hand of the Light, the hand that dug out truth, so they said. They did not like the name Questioners. There is a bridge at the village. Have your men move across. We will talk in the inn. It is surprisingly comfortable. I was told by the Lord Captain Commander himself to avoid all eyes. The village has been pacified. Now move your men. I command now. I have orders with the Lord Captain Commander's seal, if you doubt. Bornhold suppressed the growl that rose in his throat. Pacified. He wondered if the bodies had been piled outside the village or if they had been thrown into the river. It would be like the questioners, cold enough to kill an entire village for secrecy, and stupid enough to throw the bodies into the river to float downstream and trumpet their deed from Alcruna to Tanchico. What I doubt is why I am in Taraban with 2,000 men, questioner. Saren's face tightened, but his voice remained harsh and demanding. It is simple, Lord Captain. There are towns and villages across Almouth Plain with none in authority above a mayor or a town council. It is past time they were brought to the light. There will be many dark friends in such places. Bornhold's horse stamped. Are you saying, Saren, that I've brought an entire legion across most of Taraban in secrecy to root a few dark friends out of some grubby villages? You are here to do as you are told, Bornhold. To do the work of the light. Are you sliding from the light? Saren's smile was a grimace. If battle is what you seek, you may have your chance. The strangers have a great force on Toman Head. More than Taraban and Arad Doman together may be able to hold, even if they can stop their own bickering long enough to work together. If the strangers break through, you will have all the fighting you can handle. The Tarabaners claim the strangers are monsters, creatures of the Dark One. Some say they have Aes Sedai to fight for them. If they are dark friends, these strangers, they will have to be dealt with too, in their turn. For a moment, Bornhold stopped breathing. Then the rumors are true. Arthur Hawkwing's armies have returned. Strangers, Saren said flatly. He sounded as if he regretted having mentioned them. Strangers and probably dark friends from wherever they came. That is all we know and all you need to know. They do not concern you now. We are wasting time. Move your men across the river, Bornhold. I will give you your orders in the village. He whirled his horse and galloped back the way he had come, his torchbearers riding at his heels. Bornhold closed his eyes to hasten the return of his night sight. We are being used like stones on a board. Fire! He opened his eyes as his second appeared at his side, stiffening in his saddle before the Lord Captain. The gaunt-faced man had almost the questioner's light in his eyes, but he was a good soldier despite. There is a bridge ahead. Move the Legion across the river and make camp. I will join you as soon as I can. He gathered his reins and rode in the direction the questioner had taken. Stones on a board. But who is moving us? And why?
Afternoon shadows gave way to evening as Leandrin made her way through the women's apartments. Beyond the arrow slits, darkness grew and pressed on the light from...
Let me pause this real quick to say something. I do not like how they aren't pausing. I believe they should pause, at least for 4 full seconds, before they start into the next paragraph or next scene. But they're not doing that. They're just like, as soon as he stops talking, she starts talking. I don't like that. I paid for this.
lamps in the corridor. Twilight was a troubled time for Leandrin of late, that and dawn. At dawn the day was born, just as twilight gave birth to night. But at dawn night died, and at twilight day. The Dark One's power was rooted in death. He gained power from death, and at those times she thought she could feel his power stirring. Something stirred in the half-dark at least. Something she almost thought she could catch if she turned quickly enough. Something she was sure she could see if she looked hard enough. Serving women in black and gold curtsied as she passed, but she did not respond. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead and did not see them. At the door she sought, she paused for a quick glance up and down the hall. The only women in sight were servants. There were no men, of course. She pushed open the door and went in without knocking. The outer room of the Lady Amalisa's chambers were brightly lit, and a blazing fire on the hearth held back the chill of the Shinaran night. Amalisa and her ladies sat about the room in chairs and on the layered carpets, listening while one of their number, standing, read aloud to them. It was The Dance of the Hawk and the Hummingbird, by Tevin Airwind, which purported to set forth the proper conduct of men toward women and women toward men. Leandrin's mouth tightened. She certainly had not read it, but she had heard as much as she needed about it. Amalisa and her ladies greeted each pronouncement with gales of laughter, falling against each other and drumming their heels on the carpets like girls. The reader was the first to become aware of Leandrin's presence. She cut off with a surprised widening of her eyes. The others turned to see what she was staring at, and silence replaced laughter. All but Amalisa scrambled to their feet, hastily smoothing hair and skirts. The Lady Amalisa rose gracefully with a smile. "You honor us with your presence, Leandrin. This is a most pleasant surprise. I did not expect you until tomorrow. I thought you would want to rest after your long journey." Leandrin cut her off sharply, addressing the air. "I will speak to the Lady Amalisa alone. All of you will leave. Now." There was a moment of shocked silence, then the other women made their goodbyes to Amalisa. One by one they curtsied to Leandrin, but she did not acknowledge them. She continued to stare straight ahead at nothing, but she saw them and heard. Honorifics offered with breathy unease at the Aes Sedai's mood, eyes falling when she ignored them. They squeezed past her to the door, pressing back awkwardly so their skirts did not disturb hers. As the door closed behind the last of them, Amalisa said, "Leandrin, I do not understand. Do you walk in the light, my daughter?" There would be none of that foolishness of calling her sister here. The other woman was older by some years, but the ancient forms would be observed. However long they had been forgotten, it was time they were remembered. As soon as the question was out of her mouth, though, Leandrin realized she had made a mistake. It was a question guaranteed to cause doubt and anxiety coming from an Aes Sedai, but Amalisa's back stiffened and her face hardened. "That is an insult, Leandrin Sedai. I am Shynaran, of a noble house and the blood of soldiers. My line has fought the shadow since before there was a Shynar, 3,000 years without fail or a day's weakness." Leandrin shifted her point of attack, but she did not retreat. Striding across the room, she took the leather-bound copy of The Dance of the Hawk and the Hummingbird from the mantelpiece and hefted it without looking at it. "In Shynar above other lands, my daughter, the light must be precious, and the shadow feared." Casually she threw the book into the fire. Flames leaped as if it were a log of fat wood, thundering as they licked up the chimney. In the same instant every lamp in the room flared, hissing, so fiercely did they burn, flooding the chamber with light. Here above all. Here so close to the cursed blight, where corruption waits. Here even one who thinks he walks in the light may still be corrupted by the shadow. Beads of sweat glistened on Amalisa's forehead. The hand she had raised in protest for her book fell slowly to her side. Her features still held firm, but Leandrin saw her swallow and her feet shift. "I do not understand, Leandrin Sedai. Is it the book? It is only foolishness." There was a faint quaver in her voice. "Good." Glass lamp mantles cracked as flames leaped higher and hotter, lighting the room as bright as unsheltered noon. Amalisa stood stiff as a post, her face tight as she tried not to squint. "It is you who are foolish, my daughter. I care nothing for books. Here men enter the blight and walk in its taint, in the very shadow. Why wonder you that that taint may seep into them? Whether or not against their will, still it may seep. Why think you the Amyrlin seat herself has come?" "No," it was a gasp. "Of the red am I, my daughter," Leandrin said relentlessly. "I hunt all men corrupted." "I don't understand." "Not only those foul ones who try the one power. All men corrupted. High and low do I hunt." "I don't." Amalisa licked her lips unsteadily and made a visible effort to gather herself. "I do not understand, Leandrin Sedai. Please, high even before low." "No." As if some invisible support had vanished, Amalisa fell to her knees and her head dropped. "Please, Leandrin Sedai, say you do not mean Agelmar. It cannot be him." In that moment of doubt and confusion, Leandrin struck. She did not move, but lashed out with the one power. Amalisa gasped and gave a jerk, as if she'd been pricked with a needle, and Leandrin's petulant mouth perked in a smile. This was her own special trick from childhood, the first learned of her abilities. It had been forbidden to her as soon as the Mistress of Novices discovered it, but to Leandrin that only meant one more thing she needed to conceal from those who were jealous of her. She strode forward and pulled Amalisa's chin up. The metal that had stiffened her was still there, but it was baser metal now, malleable to the right pressures. Tears trickled from the corners of Amalisa's eyes, glistening on her cheeks. Leandrin let the fires die back to normal. There was no longer any need for such. She softened her words, but her voice was as unyielding as steel. "Daughter, no one wants to see you and Agelmar thrown to the people as dark friends. I will help you, but you must help." "Help you?" Amalisa put her hands to her temples. She looked confused. "Please, Leandrin Sedai, I don't understand. It is all so... It's all... It was not a perfect ability. Leandrin could not force anyone to do what she wanted, though she had tried. Oh, how she had tried. But she could open them wide to her arguments, make them want to believe her, want more than anything to be convinced of her rightness. Obey, daughter. Obey and answer my questions truthfully, and I promise that no one will speak of you and Agelmar as dark friends. You will not be dragged naked through the streets to be flogged from the city if the people do not tear you to pieces first. I will not let this happen. You understand?" "Yes, Leandrin Sedai, yes. I will do as you say and answer you truly." Leandrin straightened, looking down at the other woman. The Lady Amalisa stayed as she was, kneeling, her face as open as a child waiting to be comforted and helped by someone wiser and stronger. There was a rightness about it to Leandrin. She had never understood why a simple bow or curtsy was sufficient for Aes Sedai when men and women knelt to kings and queens. What queen has within her my power? Her mouth twisted angrily, and Amalisa shivered. "Be easy in yourself, my daughter. I have come to help you, not to punish. Only those who deserve it will be punished. Truth only speak to me." "I will, Leandrin Sedai. I will. I swear it by my house and honor." Moiraine came to Faldara with a dark friend. Amalisa was too frightened to show surprise. "Oh no, Leandrin Sedai, no. That man came later. He is in the dungeons now." "Later, you say? But it is true that she speaks often with him? She is often in company with this dark friend? Alone?" "Sometimes, Leandrin Sedai. Only sometimes. She wishes to find out why he came here. Moiraine Sedai is..." Leandrin held up her hand sharply, and Amalisa swallowed whatever else she had been going to say. "By 3 young men Moiraine was accompanied. This I know. Where are they? I have been to their rooms, and they are not to be found." I do not know, Leandrin Sedai. They seem nice boys. Surely you don't think they are dark friends?" "Not dark friends, no. Worse. By far more dangerous than dark friends, my daughter. The entire world is in danger from them. They must be found. You will command your servants to search the keep, and your ladies, and yourself. Every crack and cranny. To this you will see personally. Personally! And to no one will you speak of it save those I name. None else may know. None. From Faldara in secrecy these young men must be removed, and to Tar Valon taken. In utter secrecy." "As you command, Leandrin Sedai. But I do not understand the need for secrecy. No one here will hinder Aes Sedai." "Of the Black Aja you have heard?" Amalisa's eyes bulged, and she leaned back away from Leandrin, raising her hands as though to shield herself from a blow. "A vile rumor, Leandrin Sedai. Vile. There are no Aes Sedai who serve the Dark One. I do not believe it. You must believe me. Under the light, I swear I do not believe it. By my honor and my house, I swear." Coolly, Leandrin let her go on, watching the last remaining strength leach out of the other woman with her own silence. Aes Sedai had
I hate Leandrin.
been known to become angry, very angry, with those who even mentioned the Black Aja, much less those who said they believed in its hidden existence. After this, with her will already weakened by that little childhood trick, Amalisa would be as clay in her hands, after one more blow. The Black Aja is real, child. Real, and here within Faldara's walls. Amalisa knelt there, her mouth hanging open. The Black Aja, Aes Sedai who were also Dark Friends. Almost as horrible to learn the Dark One himself walked Faldara Keep. But Leandrin would not let up now. Any Aes Sedai in the halls you pass, a Black Sister could be. This I swear. I cannot tell you which they are, but my protection you can have, if in the light you walk and me obey. I will, Amalisa whispered hoarsely. I will. Please, Leandrin Sedai, please say you will protect my brother and my ladies. Who deserves protection, I will protect. Concern yourself with yourself, my daughter, and think only of what I have commanded of you. Only that. The fate of the world rides on this, my daughter. All else you must forget. Yes, Leandrin Sedai. Yes, yes. Leandrin turned and crossed the room, not looking back until she reached the door. Amalisa was still on her knees, still watching her anxiously. Rise, my lady Amalisa. Leandrin made her voice pleasant, with only a hint of the mocking she felt. Sister indeed. Not one day as a novice would she last, and power to command she has. Rise. Amalisa straightened in slow, stiff jerks, as if she had been bound hand and foot for hours. As she finally came upright, Leandrin said, the steel back in full strength, And if you fail the world, if you fail me, that wretched dark friend in the dungeon will be your envy. From the look on Amalisa's face, Leandrin did not think failure would come from any lack of effort on her part. Pulling the door shut behind her, Leandrin suddenly felt a prickling across her skin. Breath catching, she whirled about, looking up and down the dimly lit hall. Empty. It was full night beyond the arrow slits. The hall was empty, yet she was sure there had been eyes on her. The vacant corridor, shadowy between the lamps on the walls, mocked her. She shrugged uneasily, then started down the hall determinedly. Fancies take me, nothing more. Full night already, and there was much to do before dawn. Her orders had been explicit.
Pitch blackness covered the dungeons, whatever the hour, unless someone brought in a lantern. But Padan Fain sat on the edge of his cot, staring into the dark with a smile on his face. He could hear the other two prisoners grumbling in their sleep, muttering in nightmares. Padan Fain was waiting for something. Something he had been awaiting for a long time. For too long, but not much longer. The door to the outer guard room opened, spilling in a flood of light, darkly outlining a figure in the doorway. Fain stood. You, not who I expected. He stretched with a casualness he did not feel. Blood raced through his veins. He thought he could leap over the keep if he tried. Surprises for everyone, eh? Well, come on. The night's getting old, and I want some sleep sometime. As a lamp came into the cell chamber, Fain raised his head, grinning at something unseen yet felt, beyond the dungeon's stone ceiling. It isn't over yet, he whispered. The battle's never over. Chapter 6. Dark Prophecy. The farmhouse door shook under furious blows from outside. The heavy bar across the door jumped in its brackets. Beyond the window next to the door moved the heavy-muzzled silhouette of a Trolloc. There were windows everywhere, and more shadowy shapes outside. Not shadowy enough, though. Bran could still make them out. The windows, he thought desperately. He backed away from the door, clutching his sword before him in both hands. Even if the door holds, they can break in the windows. Why aren't they trying the windows? With a deafening metallic screech, one of the brackets pulled partly away from the doorframe, hanging loose on nails, ripped a finger's width out of the wood. The bar quivered from another blow, and the nails squealed again. We have to stop them, Rand shouted. Only we can't. We can't stop them. He looked around for a way to run, but there was only the one door. The room was a box. Only one door and so many windows. "We have to do something. Something." "It's too late," Matt said. "Don't you understand?" His grin looked odd on a bloodless pale face, and the hilt of a dagger stood out from his chest, the ruby that capped it blazing as if it held fire. The gem had more life than his face. "It's too late for us to change anything." "I've finally gotten rid of them," Perrin said, laughing. Blood streamed down his face like a flood of tears from his empty sockets. He held out red hands, trying to make Rand look at what he held. "I'm free now. It's over." "It's never over, Althor," Padan Fain cried, capering in the middle of the floor. "The battle's never done." The door exploded in splinters, and Rand ducked away from the flying shards of wood. Two red-clad Aes Sedai stepped through, bowing their master in. A mask the color of dried blood covered Baalzaman's face, but Rand could see the flames of his eyes through the eye slits. He could hear the roaring fires of Baalzaman's mouth. "It is not yet done between us, Althor," Baalzaman said, and he and Fain spoke together as one. "For you, the battle is never done." With a strangled gasp, Rand sat up on the floor, clawing his way awake. It seemed he could still hear Fain's voice, as sharp as if the peddler were standing beside him. "It's never over. The battle's never done." Bleary-eyed, he looked around to convince himself that he was still hidden away where Egwene had left him, bedded down on a pallet in a corner of her room. The dim light of a single lamp suffused the room, and he was surprised to see Nynaeve knitting in a rocking chair on the other side of the lone bed, its covers still in place. It was night outside. Dark-eyed and slender, Nynaeve wore her hair in a fat braid pulled over one shoulder and hanging almost to her waist. She had not given up on home. Her face was calm, and she seemed aware of nothing except her knitting as she rocked gently. The steady click-click of her knitting needles was the only sound. The rug silenced the rocking chair. There had been nights of late when he had wished for a carpet on the cold stone floor of his room, but in Shinar, men's rooms were always bare and stark. The walls here had 2 tapestries, mountain scenes with waterfalls, and flower-embroidered curtains alongside the arrow slits. Cut flowers, white morning stars, stood in a flat, round vase on the table by the bed, and more knotted and glazed white sconces on the walls. A tall mirror stood in a corner, and another hung over the washstand, with its blue-striped pitcher and bowl. He wondered why Egwene needed 2 mirrors. There was none in his room, and he did not miss it. There was only 1 lamp lit, but 4 more stood around the room, which was nearly as large as the one he shared with Matt and Perrin. Egwene had it alone. Without looking up, Nynaeve said, "If you sleep in the afternoon, you can't expect to sleep at night." He frowned, though she could not see it. At least, he thought she could not. She was only a few years older than he, but being wisdom added 50 years of authority. "I needed a place to hide and I was tired," he said, then quickly added, "I didn't just come here. Egwene invited me into the women's apartments." Nynaeve lowered her knitting and gave him an amused smile. She was a pretty woman. That was something he would never have noticed back home. One just did not think of a wisdom that way. "The light helped me, Rand. You are becoming more Shinaran every day. Invited into the women's apartments, indeed." She sniffed. "Any day now you'll start talking about your honor and asking peace to favor your sword." He colored and hoped she did not notice in the dim light. She eyed his sword, its hilt sticking out of the long bundle beside him on the floor. He knew she did not approve of the sword, of any sword, but she said nothing about it for once. "Egwene told me why you need a place to hide. Don't worry, we'll keep you hidden from the Amyrlin, or from any other Aes Sedai, if that is what you want." She met his eyes and jerked hers away, but not before he saw her uneasiness. Her doubt. "That's right, I can channel the power. A man wielding the one power. You ought to be helping the Aes Sedai hunt me down and gentle me." Scowling, he straightened the leather jerkin Egwene had found for him and twisted around so he could lean back against the wall. As soon as I can, I will hide in a cart or sneak out. You won't have to hide me long." Nynaeve did not say anything. She fixed on her knitting, making an angry sound when she dropped a stitch. "Where's Egwene?" She let the knitting fall onto her lap. "I don't know why I am even trying tonight. I can't keep track of my stitches for some reason. She has gone down to see Padan Fain. She thinks seeing faces he knows might help him. Mine certainly did not. She ought to stay away from him. He's dangerous." "She wants to help him," Nynaeve said calmly. "Remember, she was training to be my assistant, and being a wisdom is not all predicting the weather. Healing is part of it, too. Egwene has the desire to heal, the need to. And if Padan Fain is so dangerous, Moiraine would have said something." He barked a laugh. "You didn't ask her. Egwene admitted it, and I can just see you asking permission for anything." Her raised eyebrow wiped the laugh off his face. He refused to apologize, though. They were a long way from home, and he did not see how she could go on being wisdom of Emond's Field if she was going to Tar Valon. "Have they started to search for me yet?" "Egwene is not sure they will, but Lance says the Amyrlin seed is here because of me, and I think I'll take his opinion over hers." For a moment, Nynaeve did not answer. Instead, she fussed with her skeins of yarn. Finally, she said, "I am not sure. One of the serving women came a little while ago to turn down the bed, she said, as if Egwene would be going to sleep already, with the feast for the Amyrlin tonight. I sent her away. She didn't see you. Nobody turns your bed down for you in the men's quarters." She gave him a level look, one that would have set him stammering a year ago. He shook his head. "They wouldn't use the maids to look for me, Nynaeve. When I went to the buttery for a cup of milk earlier, there were too many women in the halls. Those who are attending the feast should have been getting dressed, and the others should either have been helping them or getting ready to serve, or to—" She frowned worriedly. "There's more than enough work for everybody with the Amyrlin here, and they were not just here in the women's apartments. I saw the lady Amalisa herself coming out of a storeroom near the buttery with her face all over dust. That's ridiculous. Why would she be a part of a search? Or any of the women, for that matter. They'd be using Lord Ogelmar's soldiers, and the warders, and the Aes Sedai. They must just be doing something for the feast. Burn me if I know what a Shienaran feast takes." "You are a woolhead sometimes, Rand. The men I saw didn't know what the women were doing either. I heard some of them complaining about having to do all the work by themselves. I know it makes no sense that they were looking for you. None of the Aes Sedai seemed to be taking any interest. But Amalisa was not readying herself for the feast by dirtying her dress in a storeroom. They were looking for something important. Even if she began right after I saw her, she would barely have time to bathe and change. Speaking of which, if Egwene doesn't come back soon, she'll have to choose between changing and being late." For the first time, he realized that Nynaeve was not wearing the Two Rivers woolens he was used to. Her dress was pale blue silk, embroidered in snowdrop blossoms around the neck and down the sleeves. Each blossom centered on a small pearl, and her belt was tooled in silver with a silver buckle set with pearls. He had never seen her in anything like that. Even feast day clothes back home might not match it. "You're going to the feast?" "Of course. Even if Moiraine had not said I should, I would never let her think I was—" Her eyes lit up fiercely for a moment, and he knew what she meant. Nynaeve would never let anyone think she was afraid, even if she was. Certainly not Moiraine, and especially not Lan. He hoped she did not know he was aware of her feelings for the warder. After a moment, her gaze softened as it fell on the sleeve of her dress. "The Lady Amalisa gave me this," she said so softly he wondered if she was speaking to herself. She stroked the silk with her fingers, outlining the embroidered flowers, smiling, lost in thought. "It's very pretty on you, Nynaeve. You're pretty tonight." He winced as soon as he said it. Any wisdom was touchy about her authority, but Nynaeve was touchier than most. The women's circle back home had always looked over her shoulder because she was young, and maybe because she was pretty, and her fights with the mayor and the village council had been the stuff of stories. She jerked her hand away from the embroidery and glared at him, brows lowering. He spoke quickly to forestall her. "They can't keep the gates barred forever. Once they are opened, I will be gone and the Aes Sedai will never find me. Perrin says there are places in the Black Hills and the Carling Grass. You can go for days without seeing a soul. Maybe I can figure out what to do about..." He shrugged uncomfortably. There was no need to say it, not to her. "And if I can't, there'll be no one to hurt." Nynaeve was silent for a moment. Then she said slowly, "I am not so sure, Rand. I can't say you look like more than another village boy to me, but Moiraine insists you are ta'veren, and I don't think she believes the wheel is finished with you. The Dark One seems..." "Shaitan is dead," he said harshly, and abruptly the room seemed to lurch. He grabbed his head as waves of dizziness sloshed through him. "You fool! You pure, blind, idiotic fool! Naming the Dark One? Bringing his attention down on you? Don't you have enough trouble?" "He's dead," Rand muttered, rubbing his head. He swallowed. The dizziness was already fading. All right. Baalzamon if you want, but he's dead. I saw him die, saw him burn. And I wasn't watching you when the Dark One's eye fell on you just now? Don't tell me you felt nothing, or I'll box your ears. I saw your face." "He's dead," Rand insisted. The unseen watcher flashed through his head, and the wind in the tower top. He shivered. "Strange things happen this close to the Blight." "You are a fool, Rand al'Thor." She shook a fist at him. "I would box your ears for you if I thought it would knock any sense..." The rest of her words were swallowed as bells crashed out, ringing all over the keep. He bounded to his feet. "That's an alarm. They're searching." "Name the Dark One, and his evil comes down on you." Nynaeve stood more slowly, shaking her head uneasily. "No, I don't think so. If they are searching for you, all the bells do is warn you. No, if it's an alarm, it is not for you." "Then what?" He hurried to the nearest arrow slit and peered out. Lights darted through the night-cloaked keep like fireflies, lamps and torches dashing here and there. Some went to the outer walls and towers, but most of those that he could see milled through the garden below and the one courtyard he could just glimpse part of. Whatever had caused the alarm was inside the keep. The bells fell silent, unmasking the shouts of men, but he could not make out what they were calling. "If it isn't for me..." "Egwene!" he said suddenly. "If he's still alive, if there's any evil, it's supposed to come to me." Nynaeve turned from looking through another arrow slit. "What?" "Egwene!" He crossed the room in quick strides and snatched his sword and scabbard free of the bundle. "Light, it's supposed to hurt me, not her. She's in the dungeon with Fain. What if he's loose somehow?" She caught him at the door, grabbing his arm. She was not as tall as his shoulder, but she held on like iron. "Don't be a worse goat-brained fool than you've already been, Rand al'Thor. The women are looking for something. Lightman, this is the women's apartments. There will be Aes Sedai out there in the halls, likely as not. Egwene will be all right. She was going to take Matt and Perrin with her. Even if she met trouble, they would look after her." "What if she couldn't find them, Nynaeve? Egwene would never let that stop her. She would go alone, the same as you, and you know it. Light, I told her Fain is dangerous. Burn me, I told her." Pulling free, he jerked open the door and dashed out. "Light, burn me. It's supposed to hurt me." A woman screamed at the sight of him, in a laborer's coarse shirt and jerkin with a sword in his hand. Even invited men did not go armed in the women's apartments unless the keep was under attack. Women filled the corridor, serving women in the black and gold, ladies of the keep in silks and laces. Women in embroidered shawls with long fringes, all talking loudly at the same time, all demanding to know what was happening. Crying children clung to skirts everywhere. He plunged through them, dodging where he could, muttering apologies to those he shouldered aside, trying to ignore their startled stares. One of the women in a shawl turned to go back into her room, and he saw the back of her shawl, saw the gleaming white teardrop in the middle of her back. Suddenly he recognized faces he had seen in the outer courtyard. Aes Sedai staring at him in alarm now. "Who are you? What are you doing here? Is the keep under attack? Answer me, man!" "He's no soldier. Who is he? What's happening? It's the young Southland Lord. Someone stop him! Fear pushed his lips back, baring his teeth, but he kept moving and tried to move faster. Then a woman came out into the hall, face to face with him, and he stopped in spite of himself. He recognized that face above the rest. He thought he would remember it if he lived forever. The Amyrlin seat. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, and she started back. Another Aes Sedai, the tall woman he had seen with the staff, put herself between him and the Amyrlin, shouting something at him that he could not make out over the increasing babble. She knows. Light, help me, she knows. Moiraine told her. Snarling, he ran on. Light, just let me make sure Egwene's safe before they... He heard shouting behind him, but he did not listen. There was enough turmoil around him out in the keep. Men running for the courtyards with swords in hand, never looking at him. Over the clamor of alarm bells, he could make out other noises now. Shouts, screams, metal ringing on metal. He had just time to realize that they were the sounds of battle. Fighting? Inside Valdara? When 3 Trollocs came dashing around a corner in front of him. Hairy snouts distorted otherwise human faces, and one of them had ram's horns. They bared teeth, raising scythe-like swords as they sped toward him. The hallway that had been full of running men a moment before was empty now except for the 3 Trollocs and himself. Caught by surprise, he unsheathed his sword awkwardly, tried hummingbird kisses the honey rose. Shaken at finding Trollocs in the heart of Valdara Keep, he did the form so badly, Lan would have stalked off in disgust. A bare-snouted Trolloc evaded it easily, bumping the other 2 off stride for just an instant. Suddenly, there were a dozen Shinarans rushing past him at the Trollocs, men half-dressed in finery for the feast, but swords at the ready. The bare-snouted Trolloc snarled as it died, and its companions ran, pursued by shouting men waving steel. Shouts and screams filled the air from everywhere. Egwene! Rand turned deeper into the keep, running down halls empty of life, though now and again a dead Trolloc lay on the floor, or a dead man. Then he came to a crossing of corridors, and to his left was the tail end of a fight. 6 top-knotted men lay bleeding and still, and a 7th was dying. The Myrddraal gave its sword an extra twist as it pulled the blade free of the man's belly, and the soldier screamed as he dropped his sword and fell. The Fade moved with viperous grace, the serpent illusion heightened by the armor of black overlapping plates that covered its chest. It turned, and that pale, eyeless face studied Rand. It started toward him, smiling a bloodless smile, not hurrying. It had no need to hurry for one man alone. He felt rooted where he stood, his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. The look of the eyeless is fear. That was what they said along the border. His hands shook as he raised his sword. He never even thought of assuming the void. Light had just killed 7 armed soldiers together. Light, what am I going to do? Light! Abruptly, the Myrddraal stopped, its smile gone. This one is mine, Rand. Rand gave a start as Ingtar stepped up beside him, dark and stocky in a yellow feast day coat, sword held in both hands. Ingtar's dark eyes never left the Fade's face. If the Shinaran felt the fear of that gaze, he gave no sign. Try yourself on a Trolloc or 2, he said softly, before you face one of these. I was coming down to see if Egwene is safe. She was going to the dungeon to visit Fain and... Then go see to her. Rand swallowed. We'll take it together, Ingtar. You aren't ready for this. Go see to your girl. Go! You want Trollocs to find her unprotected? For a moment, Rand hung there, undecided. The Fade had raised its sword for Ingtar. A silent snarl twisted Ingtar's mouth, but Rand knew it was not fear. And Egwene could be alone in the dungeon with Fain, or worse. Still, he felt ashamed as he ran for the stairs that led underground. He knew a Fade's look could make any man afraid, but Ingtar had conquered the dread. His stomach still felt knotted. The corridors beneath the keep were silent and feebly lit by flickering, far-spaced lamps on the walls. He slowed as he came closer to the dungeons, creeping as silently as he could on his toes. The grate of his boots on the bare stone seemed to fill his ears. The door to the dungeons stood cracked open a handbreadth. It should have been closed and bolted. Staring at the door, he tried to swallow and could not. He opened his mouth to call out, then shut it again quickly. If Egwene was in there and in trouble, shouting would only warn whoever was endangering her. Or whatever. Taking a deep breath, he set himself. In one motion, he pushed the door wide open with the scabbard in his left hand and threw himself into the dungeon, tucking his shoulder under to roll through the straw covering the floor and come to his feet, spinning this way and that too quickly to get a clear picture of the room, looking desperately for anyone who might attack him, looking for Egwene. There was no one there. His eyes fell on the table, and he stopped dead, breath and even thought freezing. On either side of the still-burning lamp, as if to make a centerpiece, sat the heads of the guards in two pools of blood. Their eyes stared at him, wide with fear, and their mouths gaped in a last scream no one could hear. Rand gagged and doubled over. His stomach heaved again and again as he vomited into the straw. Finally, he managed to pull himself erect, scrubbing his mouth with his sleeve. His throat felt scraped raw. Slowly, he became aware of the rest of the room, only half seen and not taken in during his hasty search for an attacker. Bloody lumps of flesh lay scattered through the straw. There was nothing he could recognize as human except the two heads. Some of the pieces looked chewed. So that's what happened to the rest of their bodies. He was surprised at the calmness of his thoughts, almost as if he had achieved the void without trying. It was the shock, he knew vaguely. He did not recognize either of the heads. The guards had been changed since he was there earlier. He was glad for that. Knowing who they were, even Changu, would have made it worse. Blood covered the walls, too, but in scrawled letters, single words and whole sentences splashed on every which way. Some were harsh and angular, in a language he did not know, though he recognized Trolloc script. Others he could read, and wished he could not. Blasphemies and obscenities bad enough to make a stable hand or a merchant's guard go pale. Egwene! Calmness vanished. Shoving his scabbard through his belt, he snatched the lamp from the table, hardly noticing when the heads toppled over. Egwene! Where are you? He started toward the inner door, took 2 steps, and stopped, staring. The words on the door, dark and glistening wetly in the light of his lamp, were plain enough. We will meet again on Toman Head. It is never over, Althor. His sword dropped from a hand suddenly numb. Never taking his eyes off the door, he bent to pick it up. Instead, he grabbed a handful of straw and began scrubbing furiously at the words on the door. Panting, he scrubbed until it was all one bloody smear, but he could not stop. What do you do? At the sharp voice behind him, he whirled, stooping to seize his sword. A woman stood in the outer doorway, back stiff with outrage. Her hair was like pale gold in a dozen or more braids, but her eyes were dark and sharp on his face. She looked not much older than he, and pretty in a sulky way, but there was a tightness to her mouth he did not like. Then he saw the shawl she had wrapped tightly around her, with its long red fringe. Aes Sedai, and light help me, she's red Aja. I was just... It's filthy stuff, vile. Everything must be left exactly as it is for us to examine. Touch nothing. She took a step forward, peering at him, and he took one back. Yes, as I thought. One of those with Moiraine. What do you have to do with this? Her gesture took in the heads on the table and the bloody scrawl on the walls. For a minute he goggled at her. Me? Nothing. I came down here to find... Egwene! He turned to open the inner door, and the Aes Sedai shouted, No! You will answer me! Suddenly, it was all he could do to stand up, to keep holding the lamp and his sword. Icy cold squeezed at him from all sides. He felt his head caught in a frozen vice. He could barely breathe for the pressure on his chest. Answer me, boy. Tell me your name. Involuntarily, he grunted, trying to answer against the chill that seemed to be pressing his face back into his skull, constricting his chest like frozen iron bands. He clenched his jaws to keep the sound in. Painfully, he rolled his eyes to glare at her through a blur of tears. The light burn you, Aes Sedai. I won't say a word. The shadow take you. Answer me, boy. Now! Frozen needles pierced his brain with agony, grated into his bones. The void formed inside him before he even realized he had thought of it. But it could not hold out the pain. Dimly, he sensed light and warmth somewhere in the distance. It flickered queasily, but the light was warm, and he was cold. Distant beyond knowing, but somehow just within reach. Light so cold, I have to reach... What? She's killing me. I have to reach it, or she'll kill me. Desperately, he stretched toward the light. What is going on here? Abruptly, the cold and the pressure and the needles vanished. His knees sagged, but he forced them stiff. He would not fall to his knees. He would not give her the satisfaction. The void was gone, too, as suddenly as it had come. She was trying to kill me. Panting, he raised his head. Moiraine stood in the doorway. I asked, what is going on here, Leandrin? She said. I found this boy here, the Red Aes Sedai replied calmly. The guards are murdered, and here he is. One of yours. And what are you doing here, Moiraine? The battle is above, not here. I could ask the same of you, Leandrin. Moiraine looked around the room with only a slight tightening of her mouth for the charnel. Why are you here? Rand turned away from them awkwardly, shoved back the bolts on the inner door and pulled it open. Egwene came down here, he announced for anyone who cared, and went in, holding his lamp high. His knees kept wanting to give way. He was not sure how he stayed on his feet, only that he had to find Egwene. Egwene! A hollow gurgle and a thrashing sound came from his right, and he thrust the lamp that way. The prisoner in the fancy coat was sagging against the iron grill of his cell, his belt looped around the bars, and then around his neck. He gave one last kick, scraping across the straw-covered floor, and was still, tongue and eyes bulging out of a face gone almost black. His knees almost touched the floor. He could have stood any time he wanted to. Shivering, Rand peered into the next cell. The big man, with the sunken knuckles, huddled in the back of his cell, eyes as wide as they could open. At the sight of Rand, he screamed and twisted around, clawing frantically at the stone wall. I won't hurt you, Rand called. The man kept on screaming and digging. His hands were bloody, and his scrabblings streaked across dark, congealed smears. This was not his first attempt to dig through the stone with his bare hands. Rand turned away, relieved that his stomach was already empty, but there was nothing he could do for either of them. Egwene! His light finally reached the end of the cells. The door to Fain's cell stood open, and the cell was empty, but it was the two shapes on the stone in front of the cell that made Rand leap forward and drop to his knees between them. Egwene and Mat lay sprawled, bonelessly, unconscious, or dead. With a flood of relief, he saw their chests rise and fall. There did not seem to be a mark on either of them. Egwene? Mat? Setting the sword down, he shook Egwene gently. Egwene. She did not open her eyes. Moiraine! Egwene's hurt! And Mat! Mat's breathing sounded labored, and his face was deathly pale. Rand felt almost like crying. It was supposed to hurt me. I named the Dark One me. Do not move them. Moiraine did not sound upset or even surprised. The chamber was suddenly flooded with light as the two Aes Sedai entered. Each balanced a glowing ball of cool light floating in the air above her hand. Leandrin marched straight down the middle of the wide hall, holding her skirts up out of the straw with her free hand, but Moiraine paused to look at the two prisoners before following. There is nothing to do for the one, she said, and the other can wait. Leandrin reached Rand first and began to bend toward Egwene, but Moiraine darted in ahead of her and laid her free hand on Egwene's head. Leandrin straightened with a grimace. She is not badly hurt, Moiraine said after a moment. She was struck here. She traced an area on the side of Egwene's head, covered by her hair. Rand could see nothing different about it. That is the only injury she has taken. She will be all right. Rand looked from one Aes Sedai to the other. What about Mat? Leandrin arched an eyebrow at him and turned to watch Moiraine with a wry expression. Be quiet, Moiraine said. Fingers still lying on the area where she said Egwene had been hit, she closed her eyes. Egwene murmured and stirred, then lay still. Is she? She is sleeping, Rand. She will be well, but she must sleep. Moiraine shifted to Mat, but here she only touched him for a moment before drawing back. This is more serious, she said softly. She fumbled at Mat's wrist, pulling his coat open, and made an angry sound. The dagger is gone. What dagger? Leandrin asked. Voices suddenly came from the outer room, men exclaiming in disgust and anger. In here, Moiraine called. Bring 2 litters. Quickly! Someone in the outer room raised a cry for litters. Fain is gone, Rand said. The 2 Aes Sedai looked at him. He could read nothing on their faces. Their eyes glittered in the light. So I see, Moiraine said in a flat voice. I told her not to come. I told her he was dangerous. When I came, Leandrin said in a cold voice, he was destroying the writing in the outer chamber. He shifted uneasily on his knees. The Aes Sedai's eyes seemed alike now, measuring and weighing him, cool and terrible. It was filth, he said. Just filth. They still looked at him, not speaking. You don't think Moiraine, you can't think I had anything to do with what happened out there. Light, did I? I named the Dark One. She did not answer, and he felt a chill that was not lessened by men rushing in with torches and lamps. Moiraine and Leandrin let their glowing balls wink out. The lamps and torches did not give as much light. Shadows sprang up in the depths of the cells. Men with litters hurried to the figures lying on the floor. Ingtar led them. His topknot almost quivered with anger, and he looked eager to find something on which to use his sword. So the Dark Friend is gone too, he growled. Well, it's the least of what has happened this night. The least even here, Moiraine said sharply. She directed the men putting Egwene and Mat on the litters. The girl is to be taken to her room. She needs a woman to watch in case she wakes in the night. She may be frightened, but more than anything else, she needs sleep now. The boy... She touched Mat as 2 men lifted his litter and pulled her hand back quickly. Take him to the Amyrlin Seats chambers. Find the Amyrlin wherever she is and tell her he is there. Tell her his name is Matrim Cawthon. I will join her as soon as I am able. The Amyrlin, Leandrin exclaimed. You think to have the Amyrlin as healer for your pet? You are mad, Moiraine. The Amyrlin seat, Moiraine said calmly, does not share your red Aja prejudices, Leandrin. She will heal a man without need of a special use for him. Go ahead, she told the litter-bearers. Leandrin watched them leave, Moiraine and the men carrying Mat and Egwene, then turned to stare at Rand. He tried to ignore her. He concentrated on scabbarding his sword and brushing off the straw that clung to his shirt and breeches. When he raised his head, though, she was still studying him, her face as blank as ice. Saying nothing, she turned to consider the other men thoughtfully. One held the body of the hanged man up, while another worked to unfasten the belt. Ingtar and the others waited respectfully. With a last glance at Rand, she left, head held like a queen. A hard woman, Ingtar muttered, then seemed surprised that he had spoken. What happened here, Randalthor? Rand shook his head. I don't know, except that Fain escaped somehow, and heard Egwene and Mat doing it. I saw the guard room. He shuddered. But in here, whatever it was, Ingtar, it scared that fellow bad enough that he hung himself. I think the other one's gone mad from seeing it. We're all going mad tonight. The Fade, you killed it? No. Ingtar slammed his sword into its sheath. The hilt stuck up above his right shoulder. He seemed angry and ashamed at the same time. It's out of the keep by now, along with the rest of what we could not kill. At least you're alive, Ingtar. That Fade killed 7 men. Alive? Is that so important? Suddenly Ingtar's face was no longer angry, but tired and full of pain. We had it in our hands. In our hands, and we lost it, Rand. Lost it! He centered as if he could not believe what he was saying. Lost what? Rand asked. The horn. The Horn of Valere. It's gone, chest and all. But it was in the strong room. The strong room was looted, Ingtar said wearily. They did not take much, except for the horn. What they could stuff in their pockets. I wish they had taken everything else and left that. Ronan is dead, and the watchman he had guarding the strong room. His voice became quiet. When I was a boy, Ronan held Jahan Tower with 20 men against 1,000 Trollocs. He did not go down easily, though. The old man had blood on his dagger. No man can ask more than that. He was silent for a moment. They came in through the dog gate and left the same way. We put an end to 50 or more, but too many escaped. Trollocs. We've never before had Trollocs inside the keep. Never. How could they get in through the dog gate, Ingtar? One man could stop 100 there. And all the gates were barred. He shifted uneasily, remembering why. The guards would not have opened it to let anybody in. Their throats were cut, Ingtar said. Both good men, and yet they were butchered like pigs. It was done from inside. Someone killed them, then opened the gate. Someone who could get close to them without suspicion. Someone they knew. Rand looked at the empty cell where Padan Fain had been. But that means... yes, there are dark friends inside Faldara. Or were. We will soon know if that's the case. Kadjin is checking now to see if anyone is missing. Peace. Treachery in Faldara Keep. Scowling, he looked around the dungeon at the men waiting for him. They all had swords, worn over feast day clothes, and some had helmets. We aren't doing any good here. Out, everyone! Rand joined the withdrawal. Ingtar tapped Rand's jerkin. What is this? Have you decided to become a stableman? It's a long story, Rand said. Too long to tell here. Maybe some other time. Maybe never if I'm lucky. Maybe I can escape in all this confusion. No, I can't. Not until I know Egwene's all right, and Matt. Light, what will happen to him without the dagger? I suppose Lord Agelmar's doubled the guard on all the gates. Tripled, Ingtar said in tones of satisfaction. No one will pass those gates from inside or out. As soon as Lord Agelmar heard what had happened, he ordered that no one was to be allowed to leave the keep without his personal permission. As soon as he heard... Ingtar, what about before? What about the earlier order keeping everyone in? Earlier order? What earlier order? Rand, the keep was not closed until Lord Agelmar heard of this. Someone told you wrong. Rand shook his head slowly. Neither Ragan nor Tima would have made up something like that. And even if the Amyrlin seat had given the order, Ingtar would have to know of it. So who? And how? He glanced sideways at Ingtar, wondering if the Shinaran was lying. You really are going mad. Chapter 13. From Stone to Stone.
What?
The Light of the Rising Sun. Chapter 6. Dark Prophecy. The Litters hurried to the figures lying on the floor. Strong room was looted, Ingtar said wearily. Throats were cut, Ingtar. If anyone long to tell here. Maybe some other time. And how? He glanced sideways at Ingtar, wondering...
I apologize. I am very sorry.
If the Shinaran was lying. You really are going mad if you suspect Ingtar. They were in the dungeon guard room now. The severed heads and the pieces of the guards had been removed, though there were still red smears in the table and damp patches in the straw to show where they had been. 2 Aes Sedai were there, placid-looking women with brown-fringed shawls studying the words scrawled on the walls, careless of what their skirts dragged through in the straw. Each had an inkpot in a writing case hung at her belt and was making notes in a small book with a pen. They never even glanced at the men trooping through. Look here, Varen, one of them said, pointing to a section of stone covered with lines of Trolloc script. This looks interesting. The other hurried over, picking up reddish stains on her skirt. Yes, I see. A much better hand than the rest. Not a Trolloc. Very interesting. She began writing in her book, looking up every so often to read the angular letters on the wall. Rand hurried out. Even if they had not been Aes Sedai, he would not have wanted to remain in the same room with anyone who thought reading Trolloc script written in human blood was interesting. Ingtar and his men stalked on ahead, intent on their duties. Rand dawdled, wondering where he could go now. Getting back into the women's apartments would not be easy without Egwene to help. Light, let her be all right. Moiraine said she'd be all right. Lan found him before he reached the first stairs leading up. You can go back to your room if you want, sheepherder. Moiraine had your things fetched from Egwene's room and taken to yours. How did she know? Moiraine knows a great many things, sheepherder. You should understand that by now. You had better watch yourself. The women are all talking about you staring down the Amyrlin, waving a sword. So they say. Light. I am sorry they're angry, Lan, but I was invited in. And when I heard the alarm... Burn me. Egwene was down here. Lan pursed his lips thoughtfully. It was the only expression on his face. Oh, they're not angry exactly. though most of them think you need a strong hand to settle you down some. Fascinated is more like it. Even the Lady Amalisa can't stop asking questions about you. Some of them are starting to believe the servants' tales. They think you're a prince in disguise, sheepherder. Not a bad thing. There is an old saying here in the borderlands. Better to have one woman on your side than 10 men. The way they are talking among themselves, they're trying to decide whose daughter is strong enough to handle you. If you don't watch your step, sheepherder, you will find yourself married into a Shinaran house before you realize what has happened. Suddenly he burst out laughing. It looked odd, like a rock laughing. Running through the halls of the women's apartments in the middle of the night wearing a laborer's jerkin and waving a sword. If they don't have you flogged at the very least, they'll talk about you for years. They have never seen a male as peculiar as you. Whatever wife they chose for you, she'd probably have you the head of your own house in 10 years, and have you thinking you had done it yourself besides. It is too bad you have to leave. Rand had been gaping at the water, but now he growled. I have been trying. The gates were guarded and no one can leave. I tried while it was still daylight. I couldn't even take Red out of the stable. No matter now. Moiraine sent me to tell you. You can leave any time you want to, even right now. Moiraine and Aglamar exempt you from the order. Why now and not earlier? Why couldn't I leave before? Was she the one who had the gates barred then? Ingtar said he knew nothing about any order to keep people in before tonight. Rand thought the water looked troubled, but all he said was, when someone gives you a horse, sheepherder, don't complain that it isn't as fast as you'd like. What about Egwene and Matt? Are they really all right? I can't leave until I know they're all right. The girl is fine. She'll wake in the morning and probably not even remember what happened. Blows to the head are like that. What about Matt? The choice is up to you, sheepherder. You can leave now, or tomorrow, or next week. It's up to you. He walked away, leaving Rand standing there in the corridor deep under Faldara Keep.
Chapter 7. Blood calls